So in this video, we're going to consider whether degrees are for dummies, right? We have this woman in this case who is in her 40s. She did 4 degrees over the course of her life, and she regrets doing those degrees in many ways, right? Because lots of people, they think being educated is really good, the key to making a lot of money or high social status. People do degrees that interest them, liberal arts degrees, English literature degrees, things like that. And then all of a sudden, when the time catches up with them, they realize, oh, maybe it's not the right decision. Maybe it's not resulting in a high income or high quality of life, right? It might be interesting to study those things, but when it comes to actually living life and earning an income, it's not so good. Now, I myself have studied at LSE. If you are new to the channel, London School of Economics is a university in the UK, which is similar to like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, things like that, right? MIT. So it's an interesting kind of discussion to have. One thing I realized once I was halfway through my degree at LSE is that, a lot of these degrees are just for prestige. It's just to open the door to maybe potential job opportunities, but you're not learning a lot of necessarily useful skills on the degree. Just things like, writing skills, some complex economics, things that you could probably learn in a couple weeks yourself, right? But you're doing them in a lot of detail, and it's just for these institutions to justify like a high entry price ticket to a good paying job, because you have to pay this high student loan to do that job. If you're doing 4 degrees, every time you do an education, a professional qualification, whether it's a degree, MBA, CFA, all these type of corporate qualifications, becoming a certified financial planner or whatever, you should think, is this converting directly into a higher salary? If it's just for your interest, or it's just a nice to have, it's just a nice thing to do, then I would recommend you don't do it. Commit that time in terms of whether it's doing a better job at your current job, switching to a job that's higher paying. There's plenty of people who are doing MBAs and have done MBAs, and they're much more junior than people who haven't done MBAs, right? You should think about, are you doing it for your interest? Are you doing it to raise your income? Are you doing it just because it's the cool thing to do? So just really bear in mind what's going on and why you're picking certain studies. So the headline is that she's got 4 degrees and she regrets them all. So she's in her 40s now, and she studied education extensively, and she has some warnings about prospects of future earnings. So let's see how bad the earnings really got for her. And the key thing about this headline is really that higher education or more education doesn't necessarily result in higher earnings, right? Lots of people think education equals more earnings. As I say, that's not always the case, and that's why you should think carefully. What are you actually studying? How is it actually benefiting you or not? Lots of people get caught up in that, oh, I know people who've done an MBA and they still work as a low-paid tax accountant. That's not really, a good outcome for yourself. And the thing is, another point to notice here is that she's in her early 40s. Now, lots of people, for some reason, they don't come to, logical realizations earlier in their life. Loads of people, it's like they hit 40. Another video I did recently with a guy who worked in a warehouse in his 40s, and he figured this type of stuff out. You should figure out, all the hard lessons. Don't listen to all the propaganda you're being told about. Oh, just stick with this stable job. Just do another degree. Do a master's, do a PhD or whatever. Really think carefully about what your life decisions are, and look at the outcome for other people who've done more studies than you. Has it really helped their income or not? And if it hasn't, then you should think about what decisions you need to be making. So let's look at some of the incorrect advice that people typically get, right? So she says, UCAS and Universities UK. So just so you know what that is referring to government bodies in the UK. They're advised people to pick degrees that they're passionate about and not feel under pressure from parents or careers to do subjects that are perceived to be most highly paid from. So this is the type of scam that universities run on the students, that, oh, pick what you're passionate about, don't pick what's going to pay a lot of money. And in the next paragraph, you see that the starting salary for some of the degrees was $18,000 per year, which is a very low salary, right? And she mentions some things like, studying 4 years of passion, maybe a degree, like I say, in English literature and reading books and having fun, if that's what interests you. But then you have a very low salary. Now, people need to really think this through and think about that contrast between what you're passionate about and what pays well. Because typically there's a middle ground there, right? Maybe you have a general interest in tech, and that coding jobs pay well, so you pick maybe something midway between that, like a web development course, right? That makes sense. It could be another instance where you have an interest in finance, but maybe you're not too good with the numbers and accounting. So maybe you study economics or some kind of other business degree that isn't too numbers heavy, because maybe that's not your strong point. And then you can go into some kind of like business analyst role as a starting consultant, some kind of business consultant. The whole point is you have to reach a midpoint between your passion and what's going to pay well. So it's all about passion and profit at the end of the day. It's not either or. And if you pick either or, if you pick your passion over profit and what pays well, you will kind of end up regretting it later on. And you probably have to do some more studies to get back on track and pick a career that's going to pay well. So what's interesting here is that she did study things like languages, and she mentioned here, studying modern languages like a French degree or something like that. And it's only paying around £27,000 after, average annual salary 5 years after graduation. So when you're doing these type of degrees, you really need to think carefully. Like I say, what is the profit? What is the salary of that particular career choice? So always check the salaries when you are going to be picking your degrees, because lots of people, they won't be. They'll just be thinking, oh, what's the interesting thing to do? So if we go back down to the second to last paragraph here, it mentions here that if she could go back to herself and give advice to her 18-year-old self, she'd encourage her to study law, because the skills that she found interesting through studying languages and doing French and degrees and learning all these European languages, she could actually register and use in terms of making some money, right? Lots of people don't seem to understand that balance. There is a middle ground. Like I say, it's not like you have to pick a boring degree or only pick qualifications that are going to pay well. You can pick something that you find interesting and that's going to pay well. So let's look at some other instances here about people who've really regretted their degree on Reddit, right? So this is Redditors who regret their degree. What's your degree and what's your advice, right? So here we've got someone who studied psychology. I work in food service now. So let me just do that. So psychology, I work in food service now. Never do anything just to please your parents. Just because they don't see you as something doesn't mean it's not your path. I told my parents I wanted to be a chef, but they didn't see me as one. I told them I would study psychology. Then they thought it'd be a better fit for me. Boy, were they wrong. The issue is that many people, they study what their parents want them to study. If it's not something that they're passionate about, but that doesn't profit well, sometimes it's something that they find profitable, but is kind of boring for them to do. So you really got to think for yourself in this life. You only get like one shot at your current life, right? So you got to kind of put aside what your parents want you to do. Parents give plenty of dumb, idiot, boomer advice that made sense in their generation and not yours, completely ridiculous advice. That's why, it's up to you how you deal with your parents' advice. Sometimes I just don't listen to it. I just kind of say we've discussed that and I don't want to repeat the same conversation again and again, because they're really out of touch with what's going on in most people's lives in the millennial or Gen Z generation. So we went to the psychology person who worked in food services. So gender studies is pointless. You've got people who actually study gender studies, which is completely ridiculous. And then that's why you should think, if you actually just have an interest in something, you could just read about it on the side. You don't have to study it. So it mentions here, this degree has gotten me nowhere in the job market. I personally don't find it pointless. They say, I'm interested in the philosophy and the sociology and history. These are things you could just do yourself and read an interesting book about gender studies if that interests you. You don't have to go and pay $9,000 or $10,000, $15,000 a year just to study that degree. You can just look into it yourself. And there's another interesting case we're going to find is someone who studied computer science, right? Computer science, and they say it's computer science, easily the field with the most freely available knowledge, and companies don't care at all as long as you prove you can program. Teach yourself and save yourself time and money. Really makes you question why higher education is not free. Right? And this is very important for you to learn, because from really the tech industry, every other industry has kind of learned, right? Why do a degree that takes you, 4 to 5 years when you could go ahead and just do a boot camp and maybe it cost a couple grand, 5 to 10 grand, and then you can just go into a job, or you can just teach yourself, show your portfolio online of what you're capable of, study hard for the job interviews and all the technical questions about coding, and then go and get a job in that industry, in the tech industry. industry. So if you can do the same for that, you can do the same with accounting, economics, law. I know there's some professional qualifications required, but then you could just teach yourself, right? And take some time out, teach yourself, maybe do 1 or 2 short courses, and then get the qualification and go into the field. Studying something for years on end and getting a degree in it isn't always the best answer. The whole key is to really teach yourself and save yourself a ton of money. And it's probably more interesting teaching yourself than relying on that. And the last question is around the MBA, right? People are super obsessed. Oh, you got to get an MBA if you work in a finance industry or corporate job. Now, it's very interesting here seeing how much it costs, right? Firstly, they say the average MBA costs about $56,000. Harvard, it will cost $74,000. See, this is a real point to make, is that the MBA, you should only do it if you really think it's going to benefit your career. Like I said, we'll go through some cases where it would, right? Lots of people do the MBA and it doesn't actually benefit them. They just basically end up, like I say, in some lower middle management role. And I really ask people to question how they decide to do this. It's a social status signaler. That's why lots of people do the MBA. They get brainwashed and they think, oh, I've got to do the MBA. And then it doesn't really benefit them. I know people who are making probably $150,000 a year, and they're not really doing much, right? In terms of how much they're earning. They're not earning super high salaries, and they probably spent, 50 to 80 grand doing the MBA. It's like, what's the point? It's no real skill. It was just a social status signaler from their perspective. Now, it mentions a few jobs where you could do an MBA, right? And I would really be suspect about some of these salaries and whether you really need an MBA or not. Because I know people who are managing directors on the trading floor of major investment banks, because they're one of the management's favorites, and they did degrees in completely ridiculous things like marketing. They did a marketing degree when now they're working in finance. And I'm not saying you can't switch interests, but if someone studied an MBA and did a finance degree and an accounting qualification, and then they become a managing director and someone else didn't do any of that, you really should question to what extent you should have studied those things and spent all that time, effort, energy, and money and get into debt when other people are succeeding without that. You could maybe do a short course online on the MBA key skills and either add that to your CV as a certificate, or just use that knowledge for your understanding. So there are some jobs that do pay well, like you say, being a chief executive. In the case of having an MBA, that could be preferable if you want to be a CEO, things like that. Managing directors, executive directors. But like I said, there's many people doing that and they don't have that qualification. So you really need to think carefully whether you actually want to do that. There are many other jobs, right, that really don't pay well. Around 100K or less, 98K, 95K, 130K, human resource manager. There's so many useless human resource managers that don't have MBAs, management analysts that don't, operations managers. So you really should think carefully. People are doing quite fine without an MBA and without a lot of other expensive qualifications. And that's why you've got to think carefully about your decision-making process. So I hope I've helped you here really rethink the process of whether you should do a degree or not, whether you should do long-term study or not, particularly now where so many degrees have been debunked, right? So many educational institution has been debunked. I remember LSE were advertising quite heavily online about their summer courses and their degrees and so on at a time where it was the lockdown period where people were studying from home and they're thinking, hold on, if I'm paying, for example, depending on the course, $10,000 a year to learn online at LSE, why don't I just spend $200 and get a couple online courses and learn the exact same thing? And then maybe I don't have the degree at the end of it, but the whole need for educational qualifications are kind of becoming debunked because people can learn things themselves, launch their own business, and then develop a reputation that is respectable online on social media. Then it's like, why wouldn't I do that and become maybe a self-employed accountant who has a good reputation online, then become an LSE degree holder who has to do an accounting qualification after that, rather than getting straight to the accountancy qualification, then go work for a company that doesn't treat them well, expects them to work long hours. So the whole standard system, which I typically debunk of the 9 to 5, is also the education system that's going through a debunking process, right? So it's very interesting to consider. If you want honest career advice to help you see through the matrix or all these scam systems, reach out to me. I have a career advice service, link in description. We can speak directly and I can tell you the truth that you're typically not getting from these standard industry, mainstream, officially rubber stamped approved narratives, right? If you want some honest, effective career advice, accelerate your path to financial freedom, let's talk directly in a call, link in description. Now, I hope you found that helpful. Let me know what you think about the degrees you've studied. Have they been worth it? Let me know in the comments below. What do you think about doing an MBA? Is that something that interests you? A lot of people, I guess, would consider it a little bit pointless these days. Do you regret your degree like all these Redditors? And then what do you think about any qualifications that are actually worth it, right? So if an MBA is maybe not worth it, what is worth it? So let me know in the comments. There are 2 recommended videos on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.